Let's talk really quickly about Mirror and Weld, and where you're going to find that is underneath Geometry, Modify Topology, and there's a Mirror and Weld option. You're going to see there's a Mirror and Weld, there's an X, a Y, and a Z, and you can do all three at once. And essentially when you do Mirror and Weld across any axis, what it's going to do is, if I turn on the floor here, it's going to mirror it across the x-axis, across the y-axis, and of course across the z-axis. Generally speaking, when you're modeling something that's z-forward, so you can see the little blue arrow z-forward and y-up, you're usually mirroring across the x-axis. So for example, this is on by default, so you can do mirror and weld, and if you're ever, if we turn off x symmetry, so if we have our transform here, then you remember if you toggle x on and off with your keyboard here, you can activate symmetry. Now, X is activating symmetry on and off, but of course you can change symmetry to be Y and it'll activate across Y symmetry. But by default, X is symmetrical, so you can like sculpt a symmetrical face or symmetrical body, and then you tap X and that turns off symmetry. So you're going to see this side is different, and you can do a mirror and weld across the X, and if your object goes across the center axis of the world, so you can see right down the middle here, it's going to go negative to positive. Which means if I have a dot over here and I do mirror and weld, it's going to mirror that dot over. If I have a dot over here and I do a mirror and weld, it's going to mirror the smooth part over. However, if you go to BI Brush Insert Primitives, hit the M as in Michael Pavlovich and grab one of these spheres and you drag it out on your canvas here. Now, let's say we want to put an eyeball in here. So we're going to hit W and just move it into where the eyeball goes. Let's move that back a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the subtool. So underneath the tool, we have a subtool menu. Underneath subtool, we have a split menu, and we're going to do a split unmask points. So now we have a head subtool and a head 1 subtool, which is actually, if you want to, you can rename this to be eye. So now we have an eyeball over here. So you may be thinking, well, if ZBrush is going to have to mirror from negative to positive, if I do mirror and weld, it's not going to work. You may be thinking you may have to go down here to deformation and mirror across the X first, and then go up here and do a mirror and weld across the X. And in fact, that will work. In previous to 2019 and 2018 and before, you actually did have to do that. However, in 2019, you can have an object over here on the positive axis, and when you do a mirror and weld across the X, it will go ahead and mirror it across X symmetry. Now you're going to want to make sure you tap the X key so you can move, you can sculpt in symmetry if you want to. But just to reiterate this, if I go into solo mode here and hold down Control and we just mask out this middle part here and Control tap in your canvas to invert that selection. And we're going to hold down Alt and we're going to reset this and we're just going to move these things together and Control drag. Now that these things two are touching, and just to be sure, we're going to go up here to our Geometry, Dynamesh, and just if Dynamesh is already on because it inherited that property, you can go ahead and turn that on. It'll Dynamesh that for you. And now that this is all one contiguous mesh, if we tap X to go out of X symmetry and we draw over here, let's go ahead and turn off polyframe here, and we do a Geometry, Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld, it's going to mirror the dot over. And if we have a dot over here, it's going to mirror the smooth part over. So as long as it's not contiguous, it will mirror from positive to negative, but if it is contiguous, it's always going to mirror negative to positive. And there's one more instance where mirror and weld is going to come in handy, and that's in this instance where, like, say we want to rotate these biceps around. It's actually biceps with a couple different spheres, and if you hit solo mode, you're going to see just some spheres bundled together. However, we have X symmetry turned on, so you can see X symmetry is turned on, so we can go through here and we can, say, sculpt on this object just fine. However, if we go in here and we try and rotate, what's going to happen is it's going to start doing some really bizarre things, like this thing is going to come way out, this one's going to come way forward. It's just not symmetrical. So one easy way to fix this is just to go down here, and it's not contiguous, although in this case it doesn't really matter. You just got to come over here to Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld across the X, and now these things will behave as expected.